The inventions of the Mycenaean Empire are reliant upon gold as a standard of notation. They do not detonate or activate the religious injunction to trade. They manifest the ability to connotate meaning to a physical asset. So if a denotation is appended upon, there is a filtering mechanism in code that relies upon the bars of a isotope, a linguistic, and a alchemical reaction. So under these systems, not only does mycelium develop into a solid apparatus on solid cache, cache is a reliancy on the state. So if states do not injunct upon the removal of these notations, the metric for gold is changed from a abbreviated to a syncratic lens, which means it gets demoted to the place of fruition. Fruit is what's traded as gold instead of the standard notation. So if fruit is traded as gold, which means they're using a solid sphere as a lineation between who gets to own what and who gets to choose what and how they detonate those switches, they all activate upon a single annotated lens. So these lenses are graphical in frame and they do not move when they are removed. They are actually physically constrained to the Indianization of a national copyright, which means they are taxable and surplus to taxation at the same time. So if a surplus taxation occurs under an Indian exchange, not only does the landholder feel they own a commodity that is inherently a pastel of their original palette. The palette is a manifesto to organize the system into rates. And these rates expand and contract on the alkaline of the alchemical reaction. So there is a lower class that expands and retracts to meet these lenses that don't infer a judge upon who gets to constrain the state. So on these lenses, there should be an abbreviation that detonates each object in the lens, and that is called a syncratic. These syncratics are useful, but they are linguistic in nature. They do not teach that they are operative. They are usurping the operative in cash. So cash is a religion and a feature of the state that infers that they are to be regarded as if the French or Russian is the receiver of whoever gets to operate on a archetype. So these archetypes are a spectacle to consume prodigy on the basis of consumption. So if consumption is a rate in these systems, not only do the individual suppose that we create a manifesto. The manifesto no longer appears from the state, it is taken from the bearer into the court, and the court decides who gets to respond upon the commercialization of a European type of inbred commerce. And inbred commerce expands upon these linguistic fields that don't use the detonative lens, but actually syncratically adjust themselves to each part of the equation. So if a seismography is used on Aztec Sinazol, that means there would be a liberal democratic form of Iovian heresy. And that heresy is injuncted to a receiver. And these receivers are open and shut, but are still in a mine of their own making. So they're actually mineral assets rather than Soviet or Hellenistic assets. In Helena, that would be called a cuneiform ethic, because these cuneiform ethics are just detonative of a mutiny of the regime of a Columbus. And these Columbuses are canary in field to who gets to be total master of the operative exchange, which would be to burn cash on a manager rather than a receiver. So to manage the cash would be to income these people rather than to subtract from them. So if you do income them, not only do they learn your language, they also learn how to subtract from the cash system their own biblical apparatus of how to teach themselves to be patient with other people. And these patiences are built into who gets to read and write in their language. And that is why language is an art of Chinese comportion, because it actually transfers intelligence to who gets to be a spy. And spies detonate cash. So they can form a banking sector around the cuneiform assets and then form unions based on who gets to be the right or the left of center party. So if left of center is a canary party instead of a Soviet party, they open fire instead of shut close the operative lens, and the lenses are turned inward once they receive the appreciation of the state function of their system. So cashiers don't manage these assets in Colombia. The Hellenists do. Hellenists are when there is a stock in charge of a bond. So that stocks are traded rather than exchanged at wholesale. And these wholesale markers are just a way to get out of the capitalist system rather than step into it. So if there is a way to receive these caches on bonus, they are erased for the appreciation of a state owner rather than for a tyrant to comport a negative officer to his position. So positions are receptacle and linguistic, but they are also central and pipage to who gets to be the crown of the party, which would be to give people the right to bear and witness armies of futility in a fiefdom that doesn't allow them to order any kind of stock, but destroys the market for bondage on the state to infer that nobody owns their judgment but the individual cash receiver, which would be to remove the cylinder of age, proof, and identity into marketable values, and that would be to copyright cash, which is a obsolete function of the state but also a negative feature of the state. So if negative features are taking place, not only are these caches permanent, they are Soviet in nature, so that if a compulsion to be mixed breed occurs, there is a natural embassy for left wingers to rely on who gets to steal and confess to the state. So, this is how jails work. So, if you confess to the state that you have stolen cash, not only does the cash get composed into a field of management, the manager doesn't receive the cash. The manager reprints copies of a variety of numbers, then receive Hellenistic orders to turn mycelium back into a European cuneiform, which would be to obey the commands of a sheriff and officer at the same time, which would be to be an island nation.